This is my channel. It's a dark and stormy night. At least it feels like one. Behind me is Fort Niagara. It was raining earlier today. It's kind of drizzling right now and I'm wet. So this should be fun. What's it like to be a soldier? Well, I'm here to tell you. Yes, even though I am a historian, I'm not a time traveler. And yes, I have not lived as a soldier in the Napoleonic Wars era. However, I have lived a long time and I have spent a lot of that time writing about this topic. I've written a series of books about military history, specifically about the Napoleonic Wars. And so this question has crossed my mind more than once. What would it have been like to be a soldier? But honestly, I think you don't need to spend much time thinking about it. You don't need to read books or talk to veterans or anything like that. You just need to take a walk outside. If you stand out in the rain for a while, eventually you will get wet. You will feel cold and miserable and sodden. And then, after a while, if you keep staying out in the rain, you start to feel something else. Something that doesn't have a name. It's just something that's part of you now because you have been exposed to the rain, and it's a sensation that stays with you always. So I think that's a good way to start talking about what it was like to be a soldier in the Napoleonic Wars. It's a long time ago and it's a faraway place, so we think it must have been very different. But honestly, there's a lot of things that haven't changed at all. There are some big differences, sure, like the fact that you had to carry a musket and didn't have an iPhone, for instance. But a lot of being a soldier is the same. You get stuck doing boring things for long periods of time. You are under the control of an authority that does not care whether you like what you're redoing or not. And then sometimes it all comes together and there's a moment that seems important. And at those moments you really have to dig down deep inside yourself and find that reserve of willpower that lets you push through. Whether it's writing term papers or being a soldier in the Napoleonic Wars, it all comes down to the same thing. I wrote a book called The Emperor's Last Legion, which is about the defense of Paris in 1814. I spent a lot of time researching artillery and siege warfare and urban combat and a bunch of other stuff. And I came to the conclusion that the biggest challenge facing a defender of Paris was not that they had to stop artillery barrages or elite cavalry charges. It was that they had to do those things day after day, week after week. Defending a city is hard enough, but defending a city for months is psychologically challenging in ways that I think are completely underappreciated. Soldiers in the Napoleonic Wars marched a lot, but the truth is, most of the time they weren't marching anywhere fast. They were marching along a road, carrying a huge backpack, carrying supplies and weapons, and they were generally doing it for a long time. That's hard. It's physically hard. You get blisters, your feet swell, your ankles hurt, but it's also emotionally difficult because it's boring. And boredom can be harder to deal with than pain. Being bored is frustrating. Being frustrated is exhausting. And before you know it, your emotions are worn out. Soldiers are people. And like all people, they experience feelings. And those feelings, those subtle feelings of irritation and frustration and weariness, those are the hardest part. If we were going to sum up what it was like to be a soldier in Napoleon's army, we could probably come up with a list of elements. First, there would be the physical discomfort. Wet, muddy boots, aching bones, chafing clothes, lice and fleas, rats and flies, hunger and thirst, dysentery and typhoid, heat and cold, stale sweat and blood. That's pretty bad. But I think there's something worse, something we don't talk about enough, and that is the toll on your emotions. Soldiers felt unseen and unknown, disposable and unloved, empty and alone, weary and bored, anxious and afraid. These are the universal experiences of war, and it's a constant psychic battering that slowly wears a person down. A lot of people think of the Napoleonic Wars as being this incredible dynamic conflict of brilliant maneuvers and daring attacks and inspiring leaders, and all of that is true. But it's also true that most soldiers never saw a battle, that the great events of the war were happening somewhere else, and that their lives were measured out in marshes, camps, and supply trains. Battles happen quickly. There's a burst of energy and activity, and then everything changes quickly. But life in camp is a steady wearing down. It's the gradual accumulation of small annoyances and inconveniences. And that's what makes the Napoleonic Wars so interesting. It's not just the battles, it's the whole thing. It's the story of an entire world, a world full of people. And each one of those people has a story worth telling. Now, here's a great story worth telling. It's actually a story about a real historical event. It's not about Napoleon or Wellington or even the Battle of Waterloo. It's about the soldiers. It's about the average soldier, a guy named Louis. He's just one man in a sea of faces. He's one of about 75,000 soldiers in Napoleon's army. And he fights at Waterloo. He survives Waterloo and he goes on fighting until Napoleon's final defeat. But nobody knows his story. Nobody cares about him. And in fact, the end of the war finds him sick and near death in a French prison. He's just one man among hundreds of thousands, and yet he's somehow the center of a universe. He's born in France, but ends up fighting in Germany, Italy, Russia, and Belgium. He marches beside Napoleon, witnessing both victories and defeats. He endures cold and hunger, loyalty and betrayal. He faces cannon fire and sword fights, and he walks through the ruins of Europe. He sees empires rise and fall, and he fights for kings he doesn't believe in. and ultimately, he loses. But maybe that's not the end of his story. Maybe it's only the beginning. And that's my story. A story about being a soldier in the Napoleonic Wars. Thanks for watching. The night is alive with drums and bugles. Men march past under a sky heavy with fireworks. Cheers erupt, cannon fire booms. In the grand ballroom, Napoleon soaks up the adoration. Laughter, music, dancing. Women in elegant gowns swirl through the crowd. Men in glittering uniforms boast of glory. This is Paris. It is 1804. Napoleon has just crowned himself emperor. The guests are a mix of old friends and new allies, many of whom helped him seize power. But most important of all, they are subjects. Men and women brought together by blood, land, culture, ideals, ambition. Together, they represent the new France. They gather like this for events both great and small. Balls and banquets, coronations and victories, weddings and funerals. One cannot be an emperor without subjects. Here, amid the celebrations, amid the joy and noise and spectacle, there is a bond forged, a sense of identity, a people and their leader united. As the years pass, though, the faces change, new allies arrive. Old friends grow tired, faces become masks, the celebrations tiresome, the banquets dull. Napoleon knows better than most that beneath this gathering, this web of relations, threads fray. Rulers don't make friends. They cultivate alliances. They play one against the other. And lately he senses unease beneath the surface. How long until these smiling courtiers are rivals? When the feasting ends, who truly stands with him? In 1814, the guests are gone. The once splendid ballroom sits empty, dark with shadows. Napoleon is gone too. No longer emperor, no longer general, only a deposed ruler living out his final days on a lonely island in the South Atlantic. The exiled emperor sits alone in a dim oil lamp lighting a modest room. Books pile high on a table beside him. Papers spill across the floor. It is 5 years since abdication. 5 years since leaving France. His guard captain enters. They are old friends. Napoleon asks about Paris, about France, about the king who replaced him, the one they crowned while he was gone. The captain hesitates. He knows how deeply Napoleon loves his homeland, how painful it must be to hear such news. So he chooses his words carefully. The king is well liked. People seem happy with the return to monarchy, yet there is much upheaval. Economic worries, political turmoil. But France is France. She will recover with any luck. She will remember. He smiles sadly. Remember what a soldier asks. The captain shrugs. The glorious years, the peace. Napoleon shakes his head. Ah, the past. We cling to it so tightly it seems we learn nothing. But though exile may strip away power, it does not touch the soul. There are things we simply cannot forget. The roar of cannon, the taste of victory, the feel of silk against bare arms, the sound of loved ones laughing, the smell of fresh bread, the sting of betrayal, the warmth of Josephine's hand in his, the chill of fear, the sound of masses chanting "Long live the King," the echo of his own voice booming through a conquered city. Such memories sustain us, drive us forward, haunt our waking hours, follow us into dreams. To be human is to remember, and memory, unlike the present, can stretch and fade and bend to our needs. Memory is a weapon, and in the hands of a skilled wielder, it is an unmatched blade. Napoleon sits alone, not in a grand palace but in a small house named Longwood. It is quiet here. The wind whistles through the grass. Seabirds cry overhead. Waves crash against the cliffs. Here on the island of St. Helena, in the middle of the South Atlantic, there are no cheers, no flicker of candlelight dances across his face. Only the steady glow of oil lamp. No courtiers bowed before him. Only a handful of soldiers serve as his guards. No diplomats plot with veiled intentions. Only a secretary records his every word. He is a prisoner here, cut off from the world he once dominated. But in the solitude of his cell, Napoleon is free. Free from obligation, free from pretense, free from the burden of empire, free to be himself. As weeks turn to months, then years, he walks alone along a path that runs around the tip of the island. The scent of damp grass fills his nostrils. The wind whips strands of hair across his eyes. Below, the sea churns white with foam. Looking out to where the horizon blurs sky and water together, he thinks of home. Of the grand rooms of the Tuileries, the scent of lilies and oranges wafting through open doors. The feel of warm bread against his palms, the sound of Josephine's laughter ringing down a palace hall. France home. He thinks of her so often, his thoughts turning back like a wave, crashing again and again. Josephine, her love was real, he thinks. Unlike the rest, she did not seek the title of empress, did not care for palaces or power. How many nights had they spent in this apartment? Their love untroubled by ambition. At least there was peace. Peace in Josephine. Even here, her image sustains him in moments of doubt. He sees her waiting for him. Moments of anger, he feels her calming hand on his arm. In moments of grief, he hears her voice telling him to be strong. And when hope flickers, he imagines her smile, radiant and real. Josephine, he goes for walks with his valet marching. They talk little. Neither man wishes to burden the other, but the quiet isn't heavy. They have known each other a long time. They fought side by side, bled side by side, laughed side by side. Though their ranks are different, their duty is the same: loyalty. In Marchand's case, absolute loyalty. In Napoleon's qualified, the young valet idolizes his master. The emperor remembers how he first arrived at the Tuileries afraid, unsure, out of place. He remembers teaching the boy how to tie his shoes, braid his hair, shave. He remembers watching him grow from awkward youth to capable servant, from scared child to loyal friend. He thinks of how many years they have been together. All those triumphs, defeats, weddings, funerals, battles, campaigns. How much history they have shared, how much they have learned from each other. What would become of marching without him? Would he find a new master, another cause to dedicate himself to? Napoleon hopes so, wishes so. He has no intention of dragging the boy down with him into exile. One evening Marching falls ill. The fever comes quickly, burns hot and fast. Each day he grows weaker. By the third day he is delirious. He calls out for his master. Napoleon is by his side in moments. The valet stirs. "Sire," he whispers. "Sire," Napoleon replies, kneeling beside the bed. "I am sorry to leave you, sire." "Go," Napoleon says, his voice cracking. "You have done enough." Marchand coughs, his breath coming in gasps. "No," he says, "it is my duty then." His eyes flutter closed, and Napoleon sits beside him as the night wears on, waiting for the inevitable. With the sunrise, his valet is dead. There is nothing more to say, nothing more to do. Napoleon watches as they prepare the body for burial. They wrap the corpse in rough linen, lower it into the ground, then fill the grave. A simple wooden cross marks the spot. The others move on, leaving him alone. The weight of his grief is a physical thing, pressing against his chest, squeezing the breath from his lungs. Who else will leave him now? Who else will be forced to choose between loyalty and life? He buries his face in his hands. It is so quiet here, so very quiet. All he can hear is the wind rushing through the grass and the waves crashing against the shore. Is this peace? Can peace be so quiet? After Marchand's funeral, Napoleon hardly speaks. The governor tries to be sensitive, sending food and wine. In time, Napoleon eats and drinks again, though less than before. Something essential is missing. Someone essential is missing. And he understands now that even emperors need more than a coterie of sycophants and yes-men. Emperors need friends. They need family. He closes his eyes, breathes in, then dictates a letter to his secretary. He wants to arrange for his adopted son to come visit, to escape the stifling rules of the French court. Perhaps St. Helena is not so bad after all, if his son can share it with him. He imagines the boy arriving, sees the younger man helping him walk the path along the ridge, hearing them talking in the evenings. Maybe then the silence won't be so heavy. Maybe then he can finally start to heal. The years drift by, each day is much like the next. Wake, eat, walk, read, write, sleep. Occasionally a visitor arrives, a general he knew in the old days, an ambassador sent by the king, a fellow exile. Sometimes Napoleon talks for hours, pouring out his heart, rehashing glories past, reliving battles. Other times, he is cold and distant. Too much has been lost, too much has changed. Those he once considered friends seem like strangers. Those he trusted with his life have betrayed him. What new loyalties can he count on? His mind wanders. He thinks of his mother, of the years he spent fighting to rise above his station, struggling for recognition, clawing his way to power. Will people forget? Will they remember? Will he be remembered? Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France, conqueror of Europe, little Corsican nobody. In the end, it is not the British who kill him. It is not the generals who conspired against him. It is not the kings who feared him. It is not the Russians who froze him. It is not the Prussians who hunted him. It is his stomach, his mind, his memories. It is time. And somewhere in the vast halls of Versailles, deep in the quiet chambers of the Tuileries, deep in the catacombs beneath Paris, a single candle flickers, casting dancing shadows across a forgotten tomb. For though exile may strip away power, it does not touch the soul. There are things we simply cannot forget. You know, I've been wanting to do an episode like this for some time, so I'm very glad to finally bring it to you. I remember the first time I visited Austerlitz a couple of years ago now, walking out on the site and thinking, gosh, if I spread my arms, I could easily be standing in the middle of a Napoleonic battlefield. Now, obviously, that's quite literally true. We are on the actual site of Austerlitz, but what I meant was that I felt completely alone. And that got me thinking about how those who fought here, those who died here, would have experienced this very same place. And how, as with everything in life, the experience must have been so different for every individual involved. In fact, the more I think about it, the clearer it becomes that there are really only two ways to experience a battlefield. There is the experience during the battle, which is something I cannot possibly hope to encapsulate here. And then there is the experience afterwards, the experience of those who remain. To talk about the former is beyond my abilities and, frankly, my ethics. Who am I to try and describe what it was like to fight in one of history's most famous battles? I would rather focus on the second, the experience of those who returned to this place in the wake of violence, both for those who fought here and for those who did not. As you can see, I'm currently at Austerlitz. We traveled to Moravia last year, and I couldn't wait to return. We started by walking along the very spot where Napoleon's Grande bivouacked on the night before the battle. As we made our way across the field, we stopped at a number of key points, including Prats and Ha, when Napoleon watched the battle unfold, and where we paused to hear some readings from eyewitnesses to the conflict. And then of course we visited the lakes where the Imperial Russian forces attempted to flee across the ice, only to be cut down by French artillery. For many, the ending of the battle marked the beginning of their troubles. At the end of the day, approximately 20,000 men lay dead or dying across the field. And though many of these were enemy combatants, a great number were also civilians. That's because in addition to the fighting on the main field, there was also fierce urban combat in the village of Austerlitz itself, which was largely destroyed as a result. Here you can see the church tower, the only remaining structure from the village, and a powerful symbol of all that was lost here. As you may have seen in some of our videos, the church suffered significant damage as a result of the battle. It was struck by artillery fire and used as a lookout point for sharpshooters. The villagers desperately tried to protect it. In fact, they even went so far as to whitewash the tower in an effort to make it less of a target, but as you can see, it was to no avail. What happened next is one of the darkest chapters in the history of this site. Following the battle, the retreating Russians left thousands of wounded soldiers behind. As you can imagine, the casualties were so great on both sides that neither side could hope to remove all of the wounded from the field. But soon, the dead were joined by the dying, and the dying were joined by the destitute. Over the next several weeks, tens of thousands of hungry, freezing men wandered the field looking for food, shelter, anything to help them survive. As if the wounds of war weren't enough, many of those who remained fell victim to disease. Even the brave peasants who ventured forth to help the suffering soldiers were affected. A French surgeon estimated that of the 30,000 men who fought at Austerlitz, no more than 8,000 survived the month of December. Eventually, the French authorities realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. They set up a number of depots across the field to distribute food and medical supplies. But the suffering continued until spring. That's why we include a visit to the Tel Well, one of the makeshift hospitals set up in the wake of the battle. In the shadow of the nearby Pratzen, thousands upon thousands of men suffered and died here. It wasn't until May 1806 that Napoleon himself returned to Austria. He arrived 3 months after the battle, and he was horrified at what he saw. Corpses were still strewn across the field, and the stench of death hung heavy in the air. He ordered that mass graves be dug and the bodies buried, though Napoleon likely expected this to put an end to the matter. The truth was that death had permeated the very fabric of the landscape. Bodies were discovered well into the 19th century, and the discovery of human remains continues to this day. In fact, archaeologists estimate that there could be as many as 40,000 bodies still buried beneath this field. The story doesn't end there. Even after the field was cleared of corpses, the mental health toll of the battle lingered. Eyewitnesses reported strange phenomena. Soldiers spoke of hearing phantom cannon fire and seeing the ghosts of fallen comrades. Even Napoleon himself grappled with these memories, famously writing to his brother Joseph that he could still hear the voices of Austerlitz echoing in his ears. So it's important to remember that when visiting this site, you're not just experiencing the physical landscape, you're experiencing the psychological and spiritual landscape as well. The scars of Austerlitz run deeper than anyone could have imagined. So why do we tell this story? Why do we need to understand what it was like for those who remained after the battle? Perhaps it's because in remembering the experiences of others, we better understand the cost of war. Yes, there are winners and losers, victors and vanquished. But what does it truly mean to prevail when so much is lost, when so much is left buried beneath the soil? Or maybe it's because as we explore these places, we find that we are not so different from those who came before us. After all, what is a battlefield if not a place of profound loss and profound humanity? What is a battlefield if not a place where tragedy is inseparable from triumph? I'd like to thank our host, who brought us here today. It is the year 1814. The chill wind carries not only frost, but the scent of smoke. Napoleon's grand retreat from Moscow has turned into a catastrophe. His exhausted troops stumble back across a frozen Europe, chased by unrelenting winter and the victorious Austrians. Along the road, a lonely woodcutter tends to his humble fire. An old man with a long white beard and shoulders stooped with age. He watches the ragged soldiers trudge past, their uniforms tattered, their eyes vacant, their numbers seemingly endless. In his heart he feels a pang of sympathy, but his face betrays nothing. He has seen enough suffering in his lifetime to last a lifetime. He has seen empires rise and fall. He has seen ambition turn to ruin and victory turn to dust. He pulls his threadbare coat tighter around himself and returns to his work, his silhouette stark against the flames. Meanwhile, deep within the Russian heartland, a small group of Napoleon's officers gather around a flickering oil lamp in a dilapidated farmhouse. They are a study in contrasts. A young artillery captain, handsome and idealistic, talks animatedly about strategy. A grizzled veteran with missing fingers and haunted eyes interrupts him with a grunt, muttering about the futility of it all. In the corner, a portly middle-aged general smooths down his ruffled shirt, lost in thought. The reality of their defeat is dawning on them. Their great emperor, the conqueror of Europe, is on the run. Their dreams of glory in Moscow have turned to ashes. The harsh winter and relentless Russian defense have shattered their invincibility. The young captain looks up, defiant. "We can still win," he insists, his voice echoing strangely in the empty room. The older officers shake their heads slowly, understanding the brutal math of their situation. Food and ammunition are scarce. Retreating through hostile lands is a nightmare. The soldiers' spirits are broken. One of them, a wiry man with sharp features, leans forward, his gaze intense. "The Russians won't stop," he says, his voice a low growl. "They'll chase us all the way home." As they speak, the fate of nations hangs in the balance. On a rickety table, a map of Europe shows the shifting tides of war. Each fold and crease marked with the blood, sweat, and tears of countless men. The officers know that the next few weeks will decide the fate of their emperor, their country, their continent. The young captain paces restlessly, unwilling to accept defeat. But the veterans among them, bearing the scars of countless battles, are grimly resolute. The relentless winter wind howls outside, mirroring the turmoil in their hearts and minds. Somewhere in the vastness of Russia, far from the smoky farmhouse and the silent woodcutter, Napoleon himself rides on horseback. His face, usually so confident, is etched with fatigue and worry. His eyes, usually so bright, are clouded with defeat. He too feels the weight of the retreating army's suffering, the burden of shattered dreams. But he is a soldier, a strategist, and soon an emperor. He knows that wars aren't just won or lost on the battlefield. They're decided in the long game of politics and alliances. He presses on, riding toward a meeting that could change the course of history. Napoleon, the little corporal who once led successful rebellions and seized control of France, now finds himself at a crossroads. Victory seemed within reach, but now the road ahead is dark. He, too, must confront the harsh realities of the winter around him and the opposition before him. His enemies are regrouping, the weather is turning, and time is slipping away. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the frozen landscape, Napoleon gathers with the leaders of the coalition forces. Among them are the Russians, the Prussians, the Austrians, and the British. They stand as a united front, their flags snapping in the wind, their expressions hard and unforgiving. Around them, the ruins of Napoleon's ambitions are scattered like fallen leaves across the snow. But Napoleon is a survivor, and even as the winter tightens its icy grip on the countryside, he begins to negotiate. He plays his hand carefully, balancing threats and promises. He offers peace in exchange for concessions. He alludes to potential alliances, but his eyes betray his true thoughts. He is trapped. The emperor who once seemed invincible is now a prisoner of circumstance. The war is not over, but his dreams of empire already feel like a distant memory. In the tense silence that follows, the future of Europe hangs in the balance. The crackling fire in the farmhouse does little to ward off the bitter cold. Inside, the officers huddle closer, their breaths forming little clouds in the dim lamplight. The young captain's idealism has been tempered by the harsh realities of war. The portly general, lost in contemplation, traces patterns on the table with a finger. The wiry man with sharp features remains intent, his gaze unwavering. Outside, the wind continues to moan, carrying with it the whispers of a changing world. And as the night deepens, these men, like so many others, are caught in the currents of history, unsure of where it will ultimately sweep them. And so our journey brings us full circle. From a humble woodcutter tending his fire to Napoleon's desperate ride, to the fateful meeting that could shape Europe's fate, we have traveled the many roads of defeat. We've seen not just the pomp of war, but its quiet toll, the wariness in the faces of soldiers, the flicker of a fading dream, the weight of a lost cause. Just as Napoleon and his officers faced the reality of their situation, so too must we sometimes confront the truths of our own journeys, the harsh realities of defeats, the disappointments, the unfulfilled dreams. For in the tapestry of life, victory is not always the only measure of success. Resilience, perseverance, and the courage to keep going in the face of adversity are virtues in themselves. The quiet dignity of a woodcutter, the strategic brilliance of a defeated emperor, the unbending resolve of seasoned officers, they all tell a story of humanity. Even in defeat, there is a quiet strength to be found. May it be a strength that guides you through the darkest moments of your journey and the quietest victories. Sleep well.